Bethesda. Few game developers have been responsible for having so many classic titles under their belt, as well as a few shit ones mixed in there too. From their early days of PC licensed games to their trademark large-scale open-world RPGs, Bethesda have solidified themselves as titans in the industry. When a developer has been around for so long, over 30 years in this case, the quality of the titles are sure to fluctuate. Now, Bethesda are one of my favorite developers of all time, but even I have to admit that not every one of these have been a masterpiece. But where do we draw the line? Which titles are worth going back and playing, and which are better left forgotten? I decided to take this burden upon myself and put together the ultimate Bethesda tier list. Now, this is a tier list I found on the website tiermaker.com. I'll have a link to this specific one down below. I'll be judging each game on a scale from masterpiece to just straight awful. To add some variety to the list, I included some games that were published by Bethesda, but not developed by them. I think it'll be interesting to see how those stack up to their in-house titles. There are also some games that Bethesda had nothing to do with on the list, like the original Dooms or Fallouts, but I decided to leave them on. Lastly, this is all just my opinion. If you want to yell at someone, yell at your dad or something. I don't know, I'm not the guy. To start off the list, we have the haven't played category. These are games I haven't played, never heard of, or can't even tell what they are based on their shitty compressed JPEG. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these because we have a lot of ground to cover, but we'll have a moment of silence for these games. Okay, to start the real list, I have a potentially unpopular opinion here. I think Dishonored 2 is a masterpiece, and an improvement upon the original in almost every way. Now, I love Dishonored 1, that'll be clear later on the list, but this game, man, this f***ing game. I'll start with maybe the strongest aspect of the game, level design. So many games in the stealth genre boast about all the ways you can complete their missions, but it's pretty obvious it's just the illusion of choice. Sure, small factors can change depending on your actions, but there's only ever one ideal path to go down. This could not be further from the truth for Dishonored 2. This game is as non-linear and modular as a game of this nature could be. Levels like the Clockwork Mansion are mind-blowing when you sit down and look at them on paper. I've played through this game multiple times, and I've played it a different way each time. I even wasted the entire summer of my sophomore year of high school trying to do a non-lethal ghost run with 0 powers, and damn it, I did it. There was a lot of save scumming, but we don't talk about that. The addition of Emily adds so much replayability too. Her powers are just as useful as Corvo, but they do a good job of standing out from him. Don't worry though, Corvo is still here too, and he might be more badass than he was in the first game. Everything just comes together and it just all works beautifully. I can't spend too much time on this game, but if you guys want a full video on Dishonored 2, just let me know down below. That being said, Dishonored 2 without a doubt is going into masterpiece tier. Next up on the list is Elder Scrolls Online. Now take this ranking with a grain of salt because I am not qualified to speak on this game at all. To put it blunt, I'm just not an MMO guy. I've tried so hard to get into this game, but it's just never clicked with me. The Elder Scrolls as a whole is one of my favorite series of all time, so the idea of exploring that world with my friends sounds amazing to me. So me and a few friends downloaded it, and we just did not care for it at all. I think we tapped out after about 25 hours, and I really don't see anything else that would make me re-download it. The grindy, repetitive nature of it just killed all excitement I had for the game. The over-monetization was also a big turnoff for me. It would dangle all this interesting looking content in front of me, then lock it behind a paywall. Keep in mind, this isn't a free game. I understand this is a norm for MMOs, so I won't judge it too harshly for it, but it still sucked. Really, the only saving grace for me was the open world itself. It was cool going to these locations that we've only heard about in the mainline games, and some that were recognizable too. I'm going to put ESO in mediocre tier. I don't think it's a bad game per se, but it's just not for me at all. Next up we have Doom Eternal, and this might be the most disappointing game I've ever played. Wait, hold up, let me explain. Doom Eternal is far from a bad game. It's really, really good. It's just I was left wanting more after playing it. Doom 2016 is one of the best shooters of all time. I put so much time into it and enjoyed it so much, so I was super hyped for Eternal. The game sadly just didn't reach my expectations. The level design just felt like a huge step down from 2016 in every way, especially the over-reliance on platforming. Platforming has always been a part of Doom, but Eternal tuned it up to 11, and not for the best. I also wasn't a huge fan of Eternal's story. Less is more with these games, but it seemed like Eternal tried to shove all these story beats down our throat. Even then, the core gameplay itself was still as fast and responsive as 2016. The setting was also a pretty nice change of pace from 2016. Even though I was disappointed by it, I'd still recommend Doom Eternal to anyone who enjoyed 2016. We're gonna put it in very good tier. We have our first mainline Elder Scrolls title next with 1996's Elder Scrolls Daggerfall. Now Daggerfall is a pretty interesting game in Bethesda's portfolio. It's not as archaic as older titles they worked on, but it's still not as refined as the post-Morrowind titles. The first time I played this game, I absolutely hated it. But I've grown to appreciate it more over the years. For its time, I'm sure the game was mind-blowing. It still has one of the biggest open worlds in all of gaming, and the main questline is actually pretty good too. If I had to describe Daggerfall in one word, it would be ambitious. Sadly, it was a bit too ambitious for its time. Daggerfall has a huge number of bugs and glitches, even by Bethesda standards. It's also pretty dated both graphically and gameplay wise. I understand it's a 25-year-old game, but it really makes it hard to go back to these days. However, I still think fans of the series should go back and give it a try. Daggerfall is going into good tier. Next up we have Deathloop. When this game was first announced, I was so hyped. The game has a near perfect concept. You're an assassin stuck in a time loop with 8 targets to kill before the clock strikes midnight. If you fail, you're brought back to the beginning of the loop. Right off the bat, I was pulled in. The release date comes by, I pick it up, and it was fine. I'll be real though, this game got so many perfect reviews, and I just don't see it. The game just had too many issues to make it a masterpiece. To start, the AI, completely brain dead. Not even joking. It makes stealth a complete joke, which is kinda bad for a stealth game. You can just full on walk past enemies and they will not see you unless you are right in their face. My biggest issue with the game was the lack of replayability. Previous Arcane games had so much replayability, but I don't imagine I'll have any desire to go back to Deathloop. This might have came off as harsh, but I do think the game is pretty good, just not a masterpiece. Deathloop is going into good tier. Now I praised Dishonored 2 earlier on the list, but the original itself is another near perfect game. Once again, the level design is just on a whole other level here. Combat is also tight and responsive, and the powers are useful enhancements to the gameplay. I also think the story is one of the best in recent history. It's simple on paper, nothing too complicated, but Corvo's story really resonated with me. I like that your choices directly affect the story. Dishonored 1 also had some amazing DLC that I don't really see too many people talking about. If you haven't played them, you need to check them out. The game unfortunately takes a big dip in quality towards the end. I'm not going to spoil anything, but there's a certain event that takes place in the game, and as soon as it happens, the game gets so much worse. Thankfully, the final level wraps it up nicely, but the third act as a whole was really weak. Even then, Dishonored 1 is a must-play title, and it's going in amazing tier. I've never really had super strong feelings about the older Doom titles, and Doom 3 is no exception to this. Released all the way back in 2004, Doom 3 was actually quite the departure for the series. The game was a lot more slow-paced and survival horror-esque than previous entries. This may be a turnoff for OG fans of the series, but this change of pace is one of the main reasons I enjoy this game quite a bit. The game is just oozing with atmosphere. Whether it's the dark, dreary corridors of the research stations, or the ambient soundscape that builds the tension perfectly, this game is all around extremely immersive. The visuals were so far ahead of their time as well. It came out in 2004, but you could easily convince me that it was some mid-generation PlayStation 3 title. One of the main drawbacks of Doom 3 is just its place in the timeline. It's stuck right in between the middle of the classic titles like Doom 1, 2, 64, and the modern titles like 2016 and Eternal. This game's uniqueness makes it stick out like a sore thumb, for better or worse. While Doom 3 might not reach the same height as the reboots have, it's still a must-play game for fans of the franchise. We'll drop it in good tier. For the sake of keeping this list somewhat brief, I'm going to be lumping Doom 1, 2, and 64 together. The games play very similar to one another and are about the same level of quality. What can I say about Doom that hasn't been said already? Almost every modern first-person shooter franchise has this game to credit for pioneering the genre. The concept of Doom is so simple, but it is genius at the same time. The high-speed, ultra-violent gameplay is so addicting that even non-gamers can find themselves glued to the screen. I don't think you'd be crazy to call these games some of the most influential titles of all time. Taking a look at them through the modern lens, the cracks do start to show a bit, but these games have aged very well for being over 25 years old. It's just that they might feel a bit bare bones today, which is to be expected. As much as I might like to put them higher, the OG Doom titles are all going into good category. Every series has to start somewhere, and the Elder Scrolls started with Arena way back in 1994. I'll be blunt here, I don't enjoy this game at all. I normally don't have a problem playing games from this era, but Arena is such a slog to play. Let's start with the gameplay. Arena, at its core, is a dungeon crawler. You enter a town, get a fetch quest from an NPC, complete said quest, then rinse and repeat for the whole entire game. This might seem a bit repetitive, but if combat's fun, this bare bones gameplay loop can be quite enjoyable. Unfortunately, combat looks like this. It's not horrible or anything, it does the job, but it does not do the heavy lifting a game of this caliber needs. Despite this, I understand how this game was ahead of its time. It was one of the first games to have a day and night cycle, with shops being closed at night and NPCs sticking to pretty complex routines. The game also features a huge open world, which while not as detailed as Daggerfall, we still have the whole entire continent of Tamriel to explore. The story isn't really anything special, but it is a good enough vessel to get you out into the world. I'm conflicted because there's so much in this game that I like in concept, but I've just never had fun playing this game. I might catch some flack for this, but Arena is going in a bad tier. I've never been a huge fan of mobile games, but whenever I heard the Elder Scrolls franchise was going to enter the world of mobile gaming, I was intrigued. The Elder Scrolls Blade sets out to give you the full Elder Scrolls experience in your pocket, and as a whole I think it does a pretty decent job, albeit with some caveats. Due to the game's free-to-play nature, the game is grossly over-monetized. As far as I could tell, you can still access most of the game's content for free, but a lot of grinding is required. The controls here are also pretty bad, but probably the best they could do with a touchscreen. Now if you look past the awkward controls and over-monetization, Blades does feel like an Elder Scrolls title. Okay, maybe more so Elder Scrolls Lite. The graphics were one of the first things that really caught me by surprise. For someone who last played mobile games when they looked like this, playing something like this on mobile was kinda mind-blowing. It also ran pretty good too, but I'm sure that's device dependent. This game has something really fun and unique that I don't hear most people talking about. Blades has a city building mechanic, and it's super addicting. I love games where I can build and improve my city, so it's probably no surprise that I spent a lot of time with this mode. I hope Elder Scrolls 6 takes this concept and dials it up to 11, because I would love to see it more fleshed out. Blades isn't a great game, but for the low price of free on a device you're probably watching this video on now, I'd recommend giving it a try. We'll put it in mediocre tier. We finally made it to the bread and butter of my channel, Fallout. Fallout 3 was the first entry I ever played, and it was this game that got me into the series. It seems like as time goes on, public opinion on this game has completely flipped. I remember when Fallout 3 was considered one of the greatest games of all time. Now, the game is kind of a joke among some people. I'm here stuck in the middle. Fallout 3 is a good game. At its best, it's an excellent translation of the series into 3D, and some peak Fallout content. At its worst, it comes across as Fallout fanfiction written by some guy who watched his roommate play Fallout 2, combined with some of the worst shooting mechanics I've ever seen in a AAA video game. To me, Fallout 3 shines in its silence. Not the big story beats, but the small, atmospheric moments. The times when you're carefully exploring downtown DC with your laser rifle and power armor is peak Fallout, and no one can tell me otherwise. You can watch this video here for more about Fallout 3's atmosphere. The game starts to fall apart with the main story. Bethesda have never been known for making high quality main quest lines, but Fallout 3 might be their worst one ever. It relies so heavily on these huge set pieces that just come off as awkward and stilted. The ending might be one of the worst in gaming history. It was that bad. Still, Fallout 3 is a must-play for fans of the series. It's going into good tier. Next, we're going all the way back to the start with the original Fallout. Released all the way back in 1997, Fallout is one of my favorite games of the late 90s. So much of everything we know about the series stems from this single game. I'll start with the story. The main questline might be my favorite in the whole entire series, specifically everything to do with the game's villain, the Master. I've also always loved the talking heads in the game. Each of these are based off of a hand-sculpted clay model, and it took about 8 weeks for just one of these to be rendered in-game. They give off a very uncanny valley vibe, almost like it's someone wearing a mask. The tone of this game, while much like its sequels, is also unique from these other games. It's a lot darker and more analog horror-like. The isometric gameplay is really going to make or break this game for you. Personally, I love the overhead view with turn-based combat, and I hope the series returns to it someday. But I wouldn't fault you for not being able to get into it. For fans of the series, or fans of great RPGs in general, Fallout is a game you need to play. It's going in very good tier. Fallout 4 is going into very good tier. I remember the day Fallout 76 got announced. I was in the peak of my Fallout obsession, so the idea of a new title had me a little excited to say the least. I sat through all of Bethesda's showcase at E3 2018 until he finally arrived. Todd the God Howard. I knew if I saw a game with this chuckle f***'s name on it, it was going to be one of my favorites of all time. I mean, look at his track record for God's sake. So, like a giddy schoolboy, I sat and watched my hero talk about this brand new game, and with every passing second, I could feel my smile slowly fading away. No NPCs? Forced online? This sounds like everything Fallout wasn't, but I just have to wait until later that year to see how it turned out. If you weren't there for the launch of 76, it's kinda hard to describe just what it was like, but I think of a pretty accurate representation of it here.
I can't do it, I can't take this shit no more, man.
The launch of 76 has been talked about to death already, so let's focus on how the game is now. And you know, it's pretty fine. But after playing it a bit more throughout the years as well as talking to fans of the game, I think I finally get it. This game, at its very core, just isn't for me. No matter what they add in the Atom Shop or whatever wacky locations they go to next, if you strip that all away and examine the skeleton of this game, I simply don't enjoy it. And that's okay. I came in expecting a mainline Fallout title, so I was setting myself up for disappointment. It's more of a Fallout Tactics spin-off rather than a New Vegas spin-off, if that makes sense. The game essentially is a mix between a settlement builder and an MMORPG. The community itself might be one of the best in all gaming. I've never had a bad run-in with a player, ever. I also respect that Bethesda stuck with the game and have added so much content over the years. This does not excuse the launch, but it's still respectable on their end. Maybe one day this game will click for me, but until then, Fallout 76 is going into mediocre tier. Alright, have you made it this far? If so, you fell for my trap. This whole video is just a clever ruse for me to get to gush about New Vegas once again. I've made it no secret that I love this game. I've been on record multiple times stating that it's my favorite game, and that still holds true today. Here's the thing though, it's been done to death. I'm not going to rehash the same talking points that get regurgitated on Reddit daily. Instead, I'll talk about some of my favorite parts of New Vegas. The writing has always been the one thing that's elevated the Fallout series over the Elder Scrolls series for me. That's not to say that Fallout has better writing, rather, it's a whole different style. The Elder Scrolls is more grand in scale, telling tales of larger-than-life heroes throughout centuries of history. This fits the series, but Fallout has always felt more personal and human to me. It's much more character driven, and New Vegas is king at this. Characters in New Vegas almost always have more than meets the eye to them. Let's take the first character we actually see in the game, Doc Mitchell. In any other game, he would be some one-note character that helps you in the beginning and nothing more. Simply a catalyst to get you into the world. Instead, we get a complex character with his own tragic backstory. We can learn more about him and his history far into the game. This is only one example out of dozens. This game has some of my favorite characters of all time, like Veronica, Joshua Graham, and Kaisar. Along with the characters, I've also really grown to appreciate New Vegas' main questline. That being said, it's also really hard to talk about for some key reasons. New Vegas' main questline is very non-linear and modular, meaning you can skip large portions of the questline and kind of pick and choose what you do and don't want to do. You can take as much or as little time with the game as you want. This gives New Vegas so much replayability. It's always fun experimenting with different factions and seeing the best or worst ending you can get. It's also a big reason the game has such a large speedrunning community. Now these are just a few of the reasons I love New Vegas, but I do have an actual video on the game planned soon. To the surprise of absolutely no one, New Vegas is going to Masterpiece tier. Now like I said earlier, I'm not a huge fan of mobile games. That being said, I f***ing love Fallout Shelter. This is how you translate a traditional game series into the mobile world. Rather than being a poorly optimized and awkwardly controlled regular Fallout game, you are now a vault overseer, and you have your own vault to run. Your jobs as overseer include making sure your vault has enough resources, sending scouting parties outside, and breeding subjects. Gameplay is simple yet addictive, and it's perfectly suited for mobile platforms. Some mobile games like Elder Scrolls Blades are kind of an inconvenience to play on the go. They require more of a time commitment compared to some simpler games. Shelter though, it's perfect. You can play this at the doctor's office, on a date, even behind the wheel. On the real side though, the game kinda gets old a couple hours in. You've pretty much seen everything there is to see. You can always start a new vault and cause more chaos. If you're just itching for a mobile game to play to distract you from the harsh realities of modern life, Fallout Shelter is a pretty decent choice. We'll put it in good tier. I'm just now realizing I put Fallout Shelter in the same tier as Doom 3. I'm not sure how to feel about that. I have zero credibility, don't I? Fallout Tactics Brotherhood of Steel has to be the most unlucky game in history. I've seen so many people absolutely clown this game, only to then realize they're actually talking about Fallout Brotherhood of Steel. I don't know which intern at Interplay was in charge of naming these games, but he needs to be taken outside and shot. So I want to hammer this home. This game, bad. This game, pretty good. Bad, good. Got it? Great. Fallout Tactics is a departure from 1 and 2 in a sense that it's more of an RTS. You control a squad of Brotherhood soldiers in combat, and I think this is the game's strong suit. A Fallout RTS is a really cool concept, and Tactics pulls it off pretty well. You can recruit humans, super mutants, and even Deathclaws. Combat is also more complex compared to the OG Fallout games. There's real-time combat, individual turn-based combat, and squad turn-based combat. The major downside of this game is everything to do with the story and atmosphere. Tonally, it feels miles off from Fallout 1 and 2, and honestly feels more Mad Max than it does Fallout. The story is also your generic post-apocalyptic romp. It's not structured like a traditional Fallout game either. Rather, you have a very linear set of missions to complete. Fallout Tactics is a very fun but flawed experiment in this series, and I'd like to see it get more fleshed out in the future. We'll put it in mediocre tier. There are 3 games from 2023 on this list. One is amazing, one is mediocre, and one is just straight garbage. Luckily, we're starting out with the amazing one. HIFI Rush came out of nowhere and absolutely floored me. I'd never even heard of this game until one of my viewers recommended I try it on Game Pass. I played the first 2 hours, then immediately uninstalled it and bought the game on Steam. From the opening seconds of the game, HIFI Rush hits the ground running and does not stop until credits roll. I've never really been a huge rhythm game fan. I played a bit of Guitar Hero and Rock Band back in its heyday, but never delved much deeper into the genre. HIFI Rush set the bar so high that I honestly might have trouble playing other games like it. Essentially, the game is a rhythm-based beat-em-up platformer. Everything in the game world moves to a beat, and you have to do actions in time to succeed. The game felt oddly nostalgic to me. It reminded me of so many amazing PS2 era games that I played, but with a more modern touch. This was one of my contenders for Game of the Year, and it's a travesty the game wasn't even nominated. If you take only one thing away from this video, it should be to check this game out. HIFI Rush is going into amazing tier. Now to Bethesda's more middling game this year, Starfield. I want to start by saying that I already made a video on my main issues with Starfield you can watch here. I can only spend so much time talking about it here, but you can see my thoughts more fleshed out there. I'll start with this. I like Starfield. It is a fine game that just happens to have a lot of major issues. My biggest issue with Starfield is the scale of it, specifically the over 1,000 planets to explore. When I first heard about this, I was extremely skeptical. There's no way they could make 1,000 planets that are diverse and fun to explore. And you know, I was right. Exploration is the weakest part of Starfield, and that's such a shame, because that's what these games thrive on. Even in games that people are mixed on like Fallout 76, the world is considered a high point. They made exploration boring, and for a game like this, that might as well be a death sentence. I also hate how clean and dull the game is. It's rated M, but honestly see no reason for it to be anything above T. Locations that are hyped up as dirty, seedy places like Neon feel more like an attraction at Disneyland. Now I'm not saying that every character has to be dropping F-bombs like a Tarantino movie, but Elder Scrolls and especially Fallout have this level of grime and grit to them that make them feel real. All in all, Starfield is still an alright game. I didn't let the hype get to me like some people, in fact I had zero expectations, so I walked away from it pretty happy. We'll put Starfield in mediocre tier. Capping off our little 2023 trilogy, we have a little game called Redfall. Now if you couldn't already tell based on this list, I'm a big fan of Arcane Studios. If you would have asked me a year ago, hey Happy, who do you think the most consistent game studio is? I would have probably named them. Then Redfall happened. Redfall is a perfect storm of AAA incompetence that only comes along once in a blue moon. Bad games get released all the time, but to have such a dumpster fire release at this scale, from a reputable studio nonetheless. Sure, I wasn't crazy for Deathloop, but it was miles ahead of whatever this is supposed to be. My only question is, what happened? I played shortly after launch with some friends, and the game was borderline unplayable. The AI, no joke, might be the worst I've seen in a game from the past 15 years. There are no-name soldiers from SOCOM on PlayStation 2 that have better pathfinding than the bosses in this game. There were also countless times I got struck in world geometry or just straight up fell through the map. Now Redfall fans will try to convince you that the game got so much better after launch, but they're lying to you. Who would have thought that Arcane wasn't the right studio for a co-op Borderlands-esque looter shooter? Everyone. Everyone could have told you that. Redfall is going straight into very bad. If I had to choose one game as the perfect adventure game, it would have to be Morrowind. At its core, that's what the game is all about. From the first moment you step into the world, everything is begging you to go out and see what you can find. This game marks the start of the Elder Scrolls formula we all know and love, but some could argue that this game perfected it straight out of the gate. One of the main reasons I love this game is the lack of quest markers. At first glance, this comes off as extremely beginner unfriendly and a big time waster, but it makes the game feel so much more immersive. Rather than just heading from quest marker to quest marker, you actually have to navigate this bizarre alien world. The lack of fast travel only reinforces this. I think Morrowind as a setting is probably the most interesting we've seen in the Elder Scrolls so far. Oblivion and Skyrim are both pretty standard fantasy, but the island of Vardenfell is something else entirely. The Dumner architecture and craftsmanship really steal the show here, but I also love the wildlife and fauna. Melee combat is role-based rather than real-time, so even if you're hitting someone directly in the face with a sword, if you have low skill, the hit will only land a small percentage of the time. This can be annoying for some, but I think it's a decent mix of real-time combat and more traditional RPGs. Morrowind deserves a video on its own, and I have one planned for the future, but I think everyone watching this should go give Morrowind a try. It might feel a bit dated at first, but once you get into it, you'll be hooked. I'm putting Morrowind in amazing tier. I'll be blunt. Doom 2016 is a masterpiece. It sits up there with Halo Combat Evolved and COD 4 as one of the best first-person shooters of all time. Everything about this game is perfect. Level design, controls, the soundtrack, good god, the soundtrack. It all comes together perfectly in a blend of blood, guts, and ammo. This is without a doubt the best Doom game. It captures everything that makes the series great. Rather than pulling a Doom 3 and changing the formula once again, it takes those classic games and improves upon them while still keeping the core gameplay recognizable. The controls are easy to pick up but hard to master. There's a very high skill ceiling for more advanced moves, but newbies can pick it up and still feel like a god. That core gameplay loop of killing enemies in various ways to top off your health and ammo is so addicting and satisfying to pull off. The level design is also amazing. I love the setting and the atmosphere. It just makes you feel that much more immersed. Doom 2016 is one of the greatest games of all time, and is well deserving of masterpiece tier. Released all the way back in 2006, Oblivion was the fourth entry in the Elder Scrolls series. This is the best game Bethesda have ever made, period. I'm kind of showing my hand early here, but I love this game. Let's start with the main questline, maybe the best in Bethesda history. The Emperor has been murdered, the Empire is in shambles, and to make things worse, portals to Oblivion are cropping up all over Cyrodiil. The story actually feels like a grand epic quest, much in the vein of Lord of the Rings. There are also quite a few twists and turns that'll keep you on your toes. My jaw dropped the first time I got to Kvatch, and it still hits all these years later. I also love that you're not really the main character. Like yeah, the hero Kvatch is, well, a hero, but really Martin Septim is the one that saves the day. It's cool to be kind of a background character in a much greater story. The factions are also top tier, especially the Dark Brotherhood. There's also a fully functional arena that you can fight in and even place your own bets. Combat and leveling are also more refined here compared to Morrowind. Bugs and glitches are usually never a good thing in a game, but in Oblivion, they honest to God make the game for me. The game is very janky. NPCs act like skinwalkers who have never seen humans interact with each other. And I don't know whose idea it was for the camera to zoom in this much during dialogue, but I want to give them a big kiss because I love it. This is probably my nostalgia talking, but Oblivion just has this unique vibe that hasn't really been captured since. Oblivion is going into masterpiece tier, and if any of you have a problem with it, you can shove it up your ass. Back to back, we have two straight bangers with Oblivion and now Fallout 2. The first time I played Fallout 2, I hated it, for one key reason: the Temple of Trials. This is a game's pseudo-tutorial area, but it can be really challenging for new players and doesn't really teach you much about the game. If you can just power through this area though, you have one of the best RPGs of all time. Fallout 2 is an improvement over the original in nearly every way. The story, the locations, and even the characters all feel so fleshed out and lived in. You play as the Chosen One, the grandchild of the Vault Dweller from Fallout 1, and probably the most OP protagonist in the series. Really, look at everything this motherfucker does in-game. He could solo all the other protagonists easy. This was also the introduction of the Enclave, one of the coolest factions in all of Fallout. Not to mention the man himself, Frank Corrigan. If you don't know this Giga Chad, you can watch this video here to learn more. I've been kind of rambling on here, but it's been 25 years. You don't need me to tell you how good this game is. It's my second favorite Fallout game, and a game that everyone should try at least once. Fallout 2 is going into amazing tier. Arcane have always been one of my favorite game devs, but I somehow managed to avoid playing Prey 2017 until this year. I'd heard nothing but praise for it, and I'm glad to say that it fully lived up to the hype. Now I didn't play the first Prey and actually know nothing about it, but I still got my full enjoyment from Prey 2017. Prey does two things almost perfectly, that being level design and world building. Back when the game first came out, I kinda wrote it off as generic sci-fi, but this could not be further from the truth. It manages to carve its own unique identity in the space science fiction RPG genre, which is apparently hard to do. Much like Dishonored, there are multiple ways to complete every objective. Prey does something I love in games where, while I'm playing, I'll look at the tools at my disposal and think to myself, I wonder if I can do this. Then boom, I can. Very few games seem to keep up with a player like this, but Prey manages to do it amazingly. Now I compared this game to Dishonored moments ago, but it actually has more in common with another one of my favorite titles, BioShock. I would describe Prey as a love child of BioShock and Deus Ex that got shoved into a space station. I don't want to get bogged down in comparisons though, this game more than stands on its own. So gameplay is great, how about the story? It's pretty good. Trying to piece together what happened to the Talos 1 in your memories had me engaged throughout my whole entire playthrough. The only real issue with it is just how the story is told. If you rush through the whole entire game without engaging in any side content, you're really only getting a small percentage of the overarching story. It's almost essential to read all files and logs you come across throughout your journey. Now I'm a filthy Fallout fan who foams at the mouth at the idea of reading pages and pages of fictitious data entries that have zero purpose at all, so I love this method of storytelling, but results may vary for you. Prey was an absolutely amazing immersive experience with endless replay possibility, and I'm honestly kicking myself for not playing it sooner than I did. I'm gonna drop Prey an amazing tier. I don't like the first Rage. I don't think it's terrible necessarily, but it's just a huge pile of nothing. Rage is everything I dislike about games from the 360 generation. A brown, oversaturated looter shooter that feels like the video game equivalent of a straight-to-DVD action movie. On the topic of graphics, let's talk about Borderlands. You know Borderlands' iconic cel-shaded art style? It originally didn't have that. In fact, the art style was changed pretty late in development. The devs realized that the game looked so boring and bland that it would absolutely tank in sales, so they changed it to something more unique. This hypothetical Borderlands we could have got is just Rage. Like, down to the T. Yes, the obvious comparison here is Borderlands, and the games do share a lot in common. I'm not a Borderlands fan at all, but I'd still rather play it than Doom. Driving is horrible, shooting is underwhelming coming from the guys who made Doom, and the story is just nothing at all. I couldn't play this game for more than an hour or two at a time because it gave me such a raging headache. Maybe that's where they got the name. Keep in mind, I'm a Fallout fan. Post-apocalyptic shooters are my bread and butter. Rage 1 might just be the exception. I literally have nothing else to say about this game, other than Jesse. In the Season 4 episodes Problem Dog and Hermanos, Jesse Pinkman is seen playing Rage 1. However, unlike the version of the game we got, the version Jesse is playing is seemingly an on-rails light gun shooter. The level he's playing is actually custom made by the devs for the show, and features Easter eggs from the show. That fun fact was infinitely more interesting than the game itself, so you're welcome. Rage 1 is going in the bad tier, so sorry to all my Rage heads out there. When Rage 1 was released, it got its fair share of criticism. The question is, would the devs listen and improve upon their mistakes? Rage 2 is an improvement over its predecessor in almost every way. Not that was much of a challenge in the first place. The game actually has colors. It's amazing how just this one change makes it so much more enjoyable to play. Gameplay here feels tight and responsive, especially the shooting. There's a ton of weapon variety here, and every weapon feels unique and fun to use. This is much more in line with what I expect from the people at id Software. I was pleasantly surprised by the enemy variety here. You really have to think during engagements and target certain enemies before others. The story and open world is where Rage 2 starts to lose me. Let's tackle the story first. I compared the first Rage to Borderlands, and apparently so did everyone else, because this game is pretty much Borderlands. This is just my personal preference, but I hate the writing in Borderlands, and subsequently this game. This cringy, so wacky humor makes me want to game into myself. I'm sorry. I don't think it's as bad as Borderlands here, but I still find myself wanting to die every time some cringe one-liner is dropped. The open world is another downside of this game. Straight up, this game would have been 100% better without an open world. Open world fatigue is a real thing, and Rage 2 is a perfect example of having an open world just to have one. If this game was more linear, it would allow the excellent combat to shine. Instead, you get the occasional combat encounter crammed in between these long spans of nothing. Driving makes a big return from the first game, and it just sucks, man. It's awful. Any mission that had anything to do with my car made me die a little inside. Other than that, Rage 2 is pretty alright, I guess. I don't think you need to rush out and get yourself a copy if you haven't already, but it's a decent game, and fit to go in good tier. Skyrim might be the most important game I've ever played in my life. There's a good chance that if I've never played this game, I wouldn't be here making this video. This was the first game I ever got hyped for. I actively followed development on it, scrounging the web for every crumb of news I could get daily. When it finally launched, I was hooked. So I loved Skyrim growing up, but how does it hold up over 10 years later? The more I go back to Skyrim, the more the cracks begin to show. I don't think Skyrim is a perfect game. In some ways, it's a step down from both Morrowind and Oblivion. But let's actually look at the game itself. You are the Dragonborn, the Dova, Skyrim's only hope against the rising dragon threat. I remember dragons being a huge part of the marketing of this game, and I bought into it hook, line, and sinker. Dragons are a really cool addition to this series, so I'm glad they're here. Without a doubt, the best part of the game is the beautiful open world. Skyrim is one of the best open worlds ever made. It feels handcrafted, like centuries of history has carved itself into the landscape, making it what it is today. Each of the 9 holds visually stand out from each other and have unique locations and climates. I'd say this is one of the main reasons the game has been as relevant as it has. The main questline gets a lot of flack these days, but I think it's actually pretty good. You do everything from infiltrating a party undercover, climbing the world's largest mountain to talk to some monks, and even go to Skyrim Heaven and fight a dragon. My main issues with the game lie with the general game design. The game is a quest marker simulator. You go from arrow to arrow without deviating much off the beaten path. Need to go into a dungeon to fetch a legendary axe? The game will now walk you through it step by step until you get there. It's a complete opposite playstyle that's being promoted by the open world. You have these two clashing game design ideologies bumping heads here, and the game doesn't know which one to give priority to. In Morrowind, the lack of real quest markers only enhance the exploration. You have your goal ahead, but you feel more free to stop and take the sights in once in a while. The factions are also noticeably shallow here, with the companions and College of Winterhold standing out as the worst. Skyrim is a hefty game, and I've barely touched the surface here, but as it stands, Skyrim is going in a very good tier. There it is, every Bethesda game ranked. Almost. Do you agree with the list? Disagree? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments down below, and tell me your favorite Bethesda game too. Be sure to click the link down below for my Discord, and post your own tier list there too. If you've made it this far, I really appreciate it. This video was a long time coming, so thank you. I think that's all from me. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.